Imagine spending 60 years building an empire. Factories with your name on the gate. Bank accounts with more zeros than you can count. A mansion so big you need a map to find the kitchen. Now imagine lying in a hospital bed, machines beeping beside you, and realizing none of it means anything. That was the life of Arthur Bell. At 82 years old, Arthur was one of the richest men in the country. He owned shipping companies, hotels, and half a city skyline. Forbes had written about him. Presidents had shaken his hand. But on the night the doctors told him he had less than 2 months to live, Arthur didn't ask for his lawyer. He didn't ask for his business partners. He didn't even ask for his money. He asked for a piece of paper and a pen. And on that paper, he wrote just one sentence. One final wish. When his family read it, they were confused. Some were angry. One of them even laughed, thinking it was a joke. Because Arthur Bell, a man worth over $4 billion, did not ask to be buried next to his wife. He did not ask for a golden casket. He did not ask for a statue in his name. He asked for something so simple, so small, that no one in his family could understand why it mattered so much to him. Stay with me until the end, because what Arthur Bell discovered in his final days is something every single one of us needs to hear, especially if you've ever felt like success, money, or achievements were the most important things in life. This is the story of the rich old man, and his only final wish. To understand why Arthur's final wish shocked everyone, you first need to understand who Arthur Bell really was. Arthur grew up poor. Painfully poor. He was born in a small rented apartment above a bakery, the third of 5 children. His father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't pay the rent most months. His mother sewed clothes late into the night just so her children could eat. Arthur remembered going to school with holes in his shoes. He remembered classmates laughing at him. He remembered promising himself, at only 9 years old, that one day he would never feel that kind of shame again. That promise became fuel. Arthur worked harder than anyone around him. He took night classes while working during the day. He started a small delivery business with a single rusted truck when he was 22. By 30, he had a fleet of trucks. By 40, he owned a shipping company. By 50, his name was known across the entire industry. Money became his proof. Proof that the boy with holes in his shoes had made it. Proof that he was no longer less than anyone. But here is the problem, and it's a problem so many successful people quietly face. Somewhere along the way, Arthur stopped chasing success, and success started chasing him instead. He didn't need more money. He didn't need another building with his name on it. But he kept going, because stopping felt like losing. And while he was building his empire, something else was quietly falling apart. His marriage grew cold. His wife, Eleanor, used to beg him to come home for dinner. In the early years, he always found an excuse. One more deal, he'd say. One more meeting. Eventually, Eleanor stopped asking. His children grew up mostly raised by nannies and private tutors. Arthur missed birthdays. He missed school plays. He missed the ordinary, quiet moments that build real relationships, the kind of moments money can never buy back. By the time Arthur turned 60, he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. And he was also one of the loneliest. Eleanor passed away when Arthur was 71. At her funeral, Arthur realized something painful. He couldn't remember the last real conversation they'd had. Not about business. Not about schedules. A real conversation, the kind 2 people who love each other are supposed to have. His 3 children, Daniel, Victoria, and Michael, grew into adults who called him Father, out of habit, not warmth. They visited on holidays. They sent polite text messages. But there was a distance between them that decades of missed dinners had created, and no amount of money could close that gap. Arthur told himself he still had time. Time to fix things. Time to be present. Time to become the father he never was. But time, as it often does, ran out faster than he expected. It started with a persistent cough. Arthur ignored it for weeks, the way busy, powerful men often ignore their own bodies. He had meetings. He had a company to run. He didn't have time to be sick. But the cough got worse. He started losing weight without trying. He got tired walking up the same staircase he'd walked up 1,000 times before. His assistant finally convinced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis was late-stage lung cancer. It had already spread. The doctors were honest with him. Treatment might buy him a few extra months, but it wouldn't save his life. Arthur Bell, a man who had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, could not negotiate with his own mortality. For a week, Arthur told no one. He sat alone in his enormous house, in a room filled with awards and photographs of a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. He thought about his empire. Who would run it? Who would fight over it? He already knew the answer, and it made him feel sick in a way the cancer hadn't yet managed to. Then he thought about something else entirely. Something that surprised even him. He thought about a small wooden table in that old apartment above the bakery. He thought about his mother's hands, rough from sewing, gently brushing his hair before bed. He thought about the sound of his father's laugh, a sound he hadn't heard in over 50 years, but one he suddenly remembered perfectly. He thought about Eleanor, young and smiling, on their wedding day, before the business had swallowed him whole. None of these memories involved money. Not one of them. That was the moment something shifted inside Arthur Bell. He finally called his children and told them the truth. Daniel, his eldest, immediately asked about the company's succession plan. Victoria asked if he had updated his will. Michael, the youngest, was the only one who cried, but even his tears were followed quickly by a question about medical costs and whether the family trust would cover private care. Arthur listened to all three of them. And in that moment, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arm, he understood something with painful clarity. He had spent 60 years building wealth for a family that now, facing his death, was mostly thinking about that same wealth. Had he done this to them? Had he taught them, without meaning to, that money was the language of love? Was this his fault? That night Arthur didn't sleep. Instead, he asked a nurse for paper and a pen. The next morning, Arthur called a family meeting. His lawyer was present. Daniel, Victoria, and Michael sat around his hospital bed, along with their spouses. Everyone expected this to be about the will. About who would inherit the shipping company, the hotels, the mansion, the accounts. Instead, Arthur held up a single sheet of paper. "I have one final wish," he said, his voice weaker than it used to be, but still carrying the same quiet authority it always had. "And I need all of you to grant it, exactly as written, if you want to inherit anything from me at all." The room went silent. Arthur unfolded the paper and read it aloud. "My final wish is this: for the next 30 days, I want my entire family, my children and grandchildren, to spend one full day with me, each of you alone, with no phones, no assistants, no business talk. Just one ordinary day, doing something simple together. That is all I ask." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel let out a short laugh, thinking it had to be some kind of test related to the company. "Father, is this about proving loyalty before the board transition?" Arthur shook his head. "This has nothing to do with the company." Victoria frowned. "That's it? That's the whole wish? A day together?" "That's it," Arthur said. Michael, always the quietest of the three, asked the question that was really on everyone's mind. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Arthur looked at his children for a long moment. Then he said something that none of them ever forgot. "Because when I'm gone, you won't remember the size of my company. You won't remember the balance in my accounts. But you might remember one honest day we spent together. And I would rather leave you with one real memory than 1,000 empty rooms filled with things." His lawyer confirmed it. The will had, in fact, been quietly rewritten. Arthur's fortune would still go to his family, but with one unusual condition: each family member had to complete their day with him within the next month, genuinely and without complaint, or their portion of the inheritance would instead go to charity. Some called it manipulative. Some called it a rich man's final power play. But those who understood Arthur best knew the truth. This wasn't about control. It was about connection, and Arthur was running out of time to create it any other way. Daniel's day. Daniel came first, still slightly annoyed, treating it almost like a business obligation. He arrived with his phone in his pocket, glancing at it out of habit until Arthur gently reminded him of the rule. They spent the day doing something Daniel hadn't done since childhood, fishing at a small lake near the old family cabin. At first, the silence between them was awkward. Neither knew what to say without the usual filler of business updates and quarterly reports. But slowly, something changed. Arthur asked Daniel about his own son, about what kind of father Daniel wanted to be. Daniel, surprised by the question, admitted he was scared of repeating the same mistakes Arthur had made, being physically present but emotionally absent. Arthur didn't get defensive. He simply nodded and said, "I was scared of that too once. I just didn't know it until it was too late to fix." By the end of the day, Daniel had caught nothing, not a single fish. But he left with something he hadn't expected, a real conversation with his father, the first one in years. Victoria's day. Victoria chose something different. She brought Arthur to her old childhood bedroom, still preserved in the family estate exactly as it had been when she was 12. She wanted to bake, just like she used to beg him to do with her when she was a little girl, a request he had always postponed for just one more meeting. They spent the afternoon covered in flour, making a lopsided, slightly burnt cake. Arthur laughed harder that day than he had in years. At one point, Victoria stopped and quietly said, "I used to think you didn't want to spend time with me. I thought I wasn't important enough." Arthur put down the mixing bowl and looked at her. "You were always important. I was just chasing the wrong things, and I mistook being busy for being valuable. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand the difference." Victoria cried. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. Relief that after all these years she finally heard the words she didn't know she'd been waiting for. Michael's day. Michael's day was the simplest of all. He didn't want to do anything special. He just wanted to sit with his father on the porch, the way they used to when Michael was very young, before the business had grown too large to escape. They talked about nothing important. Old memories, silly jokes, the neighbor's dog that used to bark at everyone. But underneath the small talk was something bigger. Michael finally asked the question that had quietly bothered him his whole life. "Did you ever wish we had less, and you had more time?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment before answering honestly. "Every single day. I built all of this thinking it would make our family stronger. Instead, it made us strangers who shared a last name. That's my biggest regret, Michael. Not the deals I lost. Not the money I didn't make. The time I didn't spend with the people who mattered most." The grandchildren. Over the following weeks, Arthur also spent time with his grandchildren, flying kites, playing simple board games, telling stories about his childhood above the bakery. To them, he wasn't the rich old man they occasionally saw at holiday dinners. He became, for the first time, simply Grandpa. By the end of the 30 days, something remarkable had happened. Arthur Bell, a man who had spent 60 years accumulating wealth, had spent his final weeks accumulating something far more valuable: real relationships with the people he loved most. Arthur passed away peacefully 5 weeks later, surrounded by his family. Not his lawyers, not his business partners, but Daniel, Victoria, Michael, and his grandchildren, all present in the room. At his funeral, it wasn't his business achievements that people spoke about the most. Daniel talked about the fishing trip where they caught nothing but gained everything. Victoria talked about the burnt cake that tasted like forgiveness. Michael talked about a quiet conversation on an old porch that answered questions he'd carried for years. Arthur's story teaches us something that is easy to know in theory, but incredibly hard to live in practice. We live in a world that constantly tells us to chase more. More money. More success. More achievements. More proof that we matter. And there is nothing wrong with ambition. Arthur's hard work lifted his family out of poverty, and gave them opportunities he never had. But somewhere in that chase, it's easy to confuse providing for our loved ones with actually being present with them. It's easy to believe that working harder now means we can love better later. Arthur believed that too, for 60 years, until a diagnosis forced him to see the truth. The truth is simple, even if it's uncomfortable to hear. No amount of wealth can buy back missed time. You cannot purchase a replay of your child's school play. You cannot invest your way into a real conversation you avoided for a decade. Time, unlike money, cannot be earned back once it's spent. Arthur's final wish wasn't really about a single day with each family member. It was a wake-up call, for his children, and for anyone who hears this story. It was his way of saying, with the little time he had left, please don't wait until it's too late like I did. If you're a parent chasing a promotion, while your children grow up in front of a screen, waiting for you to look up. If you're an adult who keeps postponing a call to your own parents because you're too busy this week. If you're someone who believes love can wait until success arrives. Arthur Bell's story is a gentle but powerful reminder. Success without connection is an empty kind of success. And the richest life isn't necessarily measured in bank accounts, it's measured in honest, unhurried moments with the people who matter most. Arthur Bell died one of the wealthiest men in the country. His companies still operate today. His name is still on buildings and hotels around the world. But if you ask his children what they truly inherited from him, they won't talk about the money first. They'll talk about a fishing trip, a burnt cake, and a quiet conversation on an old wooden porch. That was Arthur's real legacy. Not the empire he built, but the bridges he rebuilt in his final weeks, one honest day at a time. His story asks all of us a difficult but important question. If you knew you only had a short time left, what would your final wish be? Would it be about achievements, or about the people you've been too busy to truly see? You don't need a terminal diagnosis to learn this lesson. You can choose, starting today, to put down the phone during dinner. To show up for the small, ordinary moments. To tell the people you love that you love them, instead of assuming they already know. Because in the end, it's rarely the meetings we remember. It's the moments. So let's bring it all together. Arthur Bell spent 60 years building incredible wealth, only to realize on his deathbed that the thing he valued most wasn't money, it was time, connection, and presence with the people he loved. His final wish wasn't for a golden statue or a bigger fortune. It was for one honest, ordinary day with each of his children, a gift far more valuable than anything money could buy. The lesson is simple: don't wait for a diagnosis, a deadline, or a tragedy to start showing up for the people who matter. Call your parents today. Sit with your kids without your phone tonight. Say the words you've been holding back. Life is not measured by what we accumulate, but by the moments we truly share. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to reach out to someone you love, a simple message, a phone call, or just a few minutes of real, undivided attention. That small act might mean more than you think. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more powerful, real-life inspired stories like this one every week. And if it moved you even a little, drop a comment below and let us know what your own final wish would be. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.